And I'm back here on YouTube for a new building project. Last week you may have joined me during one of my building sessions of the Star Wars ship Slave One, Boba Fett's ship. That was a rental set, collector's edition. Took a lot of effort to put that together. And I figured for this week I want to do something a little bit simpler, and that is, or actually I'm not sure if it's simpler, but it's definitely very different. Hi Kieran. And I want to go from the world of Star Wars to the world of Middle-earth, and more specifically to this region called the Shire, where the hobbits live. And here I have one of the most famous hobbits. Of course, it's Bilbo Baggins, reading his book and saying hi to this grey wizard arriving on a horse and carriage, ready to entertain the villagers with his fireworks that are in the back, and of course carrying his big, well, it's not really a walking stick, but it is definitely his staff, his wizard's staff. And this here is a set that I was able to purchase recently, and that was very easy to build, but definitely left me hungry for more of Middle-earth in Lego form. And one of the most coveted sets I think that Lego has ever made is the set of Baggin, which is, for those of you that are not familiar with the world of Middle-earth, it is the house where Bilbo Baggins lives. It's a home underground, not like a dark, gloomy, wet hole, but a very comfortable hobbit hole with good food and nice furniture and warm carpet under your feet. The problem with that set is it is very, very rare. It was made many years ago, I think even for The Lord of the Rings, when those movies were in cinema. And afterwards, they've gotten another license to do Hobbit-based Lego sets. But those proved to be less popular than the Lord of the Rings sets, probably also because the Hobbit movies themselves were a little less successful compared to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So this set of Bilbo Baggins' home is almost impossible to get for a normal price. Plus, I had some trouble with the way in which that set is built. It looks a bit chunky. It lacks the, let's say, the detail of later Lego sets. And so this week I'm gonna start a new project, and that is I'm going to try to reconstruct Baggin, the Baggin Lego set. Unfortunately, I'm unable to get all the official parts, so I'll do part of it with lesser quality bricks. But still, I want to see if I can get close to the original, and then I want to enhance it a little bit. For instance, this, of course, is a scene that takes place also in the Shire, and I'd like to kind of extend the original build of Baggin into a bit of a diorama where I can place this horse and carriage. Maybe we can even build a little bridge or something like that. So I'm going to be going a little bit more, I'm going to venture more into the territory of what they call MOCs, the MOCs. So it's these modified Lego sets. And hopefully you can help me with that, but with your suggestions. As usual, I'm also looking at the chat room from time to time, chatting with you while I'm building this. And it's always nice to see some of the regulars. We've got Kieran, we've got US West. I don't recall that name, but you may have stopped by in the past. And Steven in California, who is right now in Barcelona. So that's in my neck of the woods. Well, not really, but it's on the continent where I live. And then we've got Joachim and Samuel, who's always greeting me in Latin, so that is very good. And Dirk is there, and Josiah, and who has a special prayer intention. There's a Star Wars fan on, I think on YouTube, and her sister went missing, and so they found her body, the body of her sister yesterday. That's very sad. So we'll definitely pray for her and for the soul of her sister. Chin is there too, and says, I built a Halo Mega Block set that I've had for years. Thanks for getting me back into Legos and building in general. That is great. I enjoy hearing that I'm not the only one who likes to just create stuff and build stuff. LDS Lab is there too. Good evening. Dark Cloud is there. Brenda is there. Samuel is there again. Samuel says, I like the Star Wars prequels. I need forgiveness. No, you don't. It is perfectly fine. But no more Star Wars today. We are going to talk about Middle-earth. The first thing I'm going to do is, of course, what is Middle-earth without its inhabitants? And we are going to construct a few figurines, a couple of the dwarves, because, of course, when we first get to see Baggin, it's in The Hobbit. The Hobbit story is many years before the events of The Lord of the Rings. And of course, the first time that we see Baggin, Bilbo Baggins lives there. And so we first need to have Bilbo Baggins. And unfortunately, I have little Bilbo here, who's got two faces, a sad face and a happy face. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera because it's the camera is a bit far away now. And that, of course, reflects his own sentiments. He's quite happy as a hobbit, but when adventure knocks on his door, literally, when Gandalf shows up and invites him to step into an adventure, and of course, Bilbo gets a little bit more worried, and he's not sure if he actually likes that because, well, he's got two lineages in his family. You've got the Tooks. Those were more adventurous, and then you've got the Bagginses, if I'm not mistaken, kind of more like the homely hobbits. So here we have a still happy-looking Bilbo Baggins, still very young. He's got his he's got kind of in a casual dress. Really like what they did with the paint, and of course he's already got the sword, which is not very realistic because Sting, he only gets that later on in the story, of course. But we'll just put him there, and that is Bilbo. This, of course, is Frodo, his nephew, and then he's visited by Gandalf the Grey. I already have Gandalf here on the wagon, but I also want to have Gandalf perhaps sitting at the table, or I don't know. Notice that the beard is not really exactly the same beard. Well, anyway, we'll just put it in place for now. And we'll put the hat on. We'll just pretend that this is Gandalf from another part of the story. All right. And the feet. Oh, I totally forget his cape. Just put that on. I also have a third Gandalf the Grey, which is part of a set, also kind of a micro set, where he's fighting Saruman. But I will build that set later on because that, of course, takes place in a very different part of Middle-earth. All right. I'll give him his staff. Oops. Which is very, kind of a very boring, plain brown rod. It's nothing too special. I wish they'd done like a special mold. So here we are. We have, again, I'll just put him next to Bilbo there. And Arnold wants to know if I'm not building a UCS set. I'm not. I returned the Slave 1. And I didn't pick up another rental set because I have a little less time this week than I had last week. So we're just doing something a little bit simpler. Although you never know how big this Middle Earth project will become. Creepy Dog wants to know how my father is. My father is currently in a rehabilitation center. Looks a little bit more stable. Has a few more clearer moments. So that's good. That's hopeful. But he's also still, not there yet. So we keep praying for him. And hopefully he'll get back to his old self, albeit without one leg. But it's still worrisome, but I'm very glad for him that he's no longer at the hospital, because the hospital was not really equipped for, long-term patients like he is. All right, we're going to build another dwarf. Now, I have to say I'm not very... let's say up to date when it comes to, oops, oh, the arm falls off. When it comes to the names of the dwarves, I know it's Fili, Kili, Gloin, Born, whatever. I just don't remember those names, nor do I really remember exactly which movie version belongs to the names. This is the one with the funny hat. Really love the design of this hat. And the dwarves all have a friendly face and an angry face. And of course the angry face is important because dwarves are temperamental. And of course they also fight enemies. So here we go. We've got ourselves another dwarf. And this is one of the dwarves that visit, well, actually all the dwarves visit Bilbo Baggins. But this is one of the dwarves that was part of the original Baggin Lego set. So just put him here. And then we've got Bombur. And I remember his name because of his place in the story. Loves to eat. And he looks very chubby. Even his face looks chubby. And there's actually both sides. He looks happy and even happier on the other side. So there's no angry face for Bombur. He does have that huge orange beard, which I loved in the movies. I'll just put that. And the beard actually also has a fake belly, so he looks much fatter than a regular Lego minifig would allow. So here we go. Here he is, Bombur, with his braided beard. Gonna put him next to the other dwarves. There we go. And then we've got Balin, I think. The kind of friendly older dwarf. Correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, with these names. Crumply wants to know why I needed to disassemble the Boba Fett ship. Well, it was because it was a rental set. Normally for that set, I'd pay several €100. And now I could build the set for only, what did I pay? €7.50. Had a lot of fun, but the downside is you have to disassemble it because someone else is going to build it after me. Samuel says, I don't like the Hobbit trilogy. I thought it was fine. It's not as good as Lord of the Rings, but then again, poor Jackson was forced to turn it into 3 movies, which was not his plan. But he had to comply with the demands of the studio. And I still think that he did a pretty good job, just given, if you look at the behind-the-scenes material on the DVDs or the Blu-rays, that's when you start to appreciate what they've been able to do with the incredible amount of the time pressure, all sorts of problems, not caused by him, but mostly by the studios. So I still think that they did a pretty good job. Could it have been better? Yes. But given the circumstances, I think they did something really, really good. And I really want to be in Middle Earth. I don't really care about the quality of it doesn't have to be fantastic as long as it's, you know, letting me stay in Middle Earth for a little bit longer. What I like about this dwarf is he doesn't have a mustache, and that was actually a last-minute change that the actor requested. So the character had always been designed with a mustache, and then the actor convinced Peter Jackson, I think on the first day of shooting, to let him take off the mustache. And now you cannot imagine him having a white mustache. This looks so much better. And of course, it's for the actor, it's easier to act because you can see the upper lip. It's very hard to show emotion when you can't really use your mouth because it's covered in a fake beard. Okay, Kieran gets a new Nintendo game that he's looking forward to. Samuel wants to know what my country is. It's the Netherlands. It's Holland. Above France, above Belgium, and underneath Denmark. The land of Lego. A friend of Samuel is ill. He's a 46-year-old pastor, father of 5, and he's now dying of cancer and only has months left. We'll definitely pray for him and for his family. Austin is looking forward to Spider-Man Far From Home. Me too. Only a few days before that premieres over here. I'm definitely going to watch it. I was very sad to see that Detective Pikachu has already left the theater. And I didn't find the time to go watch it. So I'm very sad about that. All right, I have another dwarf with a huge beard. I can't really tell what is the front and what is the back of the beard. I guess this is the right way to put it. So much facial hair. He's bald. This is the one with all the tattoos on his on the back of his head. So he's bald, and he's carrying this this axe, this green axe. Although I think that actually this particular axe is only used much later on in, I think, the third movie only, or perhaps the second one. So here we go. I'll just give him the axe. I'm not sure if I'll give him the axe. I'm not sure if this is the right way to put it together, but it doesn't matter. I don't remember any weapons when they enter Bilbo's house. So here we have our collection of dwarves. Now, of course, they have been instructed by Gandalf to look for the sign to find this special burglar that they need to get back the gold that Smaug stole. Brenda says, the disassemble process was intense. I was worried for your fingers. My fingers are still, there's a little dark spot. You see that? That is actually a blood cloth. A blood clot from disassembling everything. Next time I'll certainly take more time. How long did it take to disassemble the Slave One? I'll tell you, Mike, it took exactly 2 hours. The video is up on the YouTube channel. Just go to the playlist, the Lego playlist, and you should be able to, I called it like, watch me destroy the Slave One or something like that. I try to follow one of yours advice, telling me, you know, the destruction videos could be a separate thing that people may enjoy because you're destroying something beautiful, and it's like, will it blend? And so that's why it's got a bit of a provocative title. And but it was a good exercise. It was not as traumatic as I thought it would be. All right, let me see. When I get to the end of the comments, I will start building Baggin. The Slave One is now in a 20-year anniversary edition, smaller, and you are absolutely right. And that is a very beautiful set. In certain ways, it's smaller than the commemorative edition or than the UCS, but it also looks very, very good, and it has some features that the display model doesn't have. So that may be a good, you know, like a low budget or lower budget solution to still get the Slave one. Kieran is getting Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Nice. Mario Kart is so much fun. It is definitely smaller, but not that small. I mean, I think the one that I had is about this, and then the 20th anniversary is about 2/3 of that size. It's still looking very good, I think. Smaug was based on a monster in Beowulf. Yes. Tolkien, of course, was heavily inspired by the literature that he loved and that he oftentimes also translated. So I'm going to take out the first few pieces and see how far we can get with this. Now again, this is not real Lego, unfortunately, because this set is no longer on the market. I think the rental store where I got the Slave one has a second-hand set of Baggin, and it is almost $100 for something that, you know, is still relatively small. Anyway, let's see how far we can get. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's it. And of course I want to build something a little bit more ambitious than the original set, but we always have to start somewhere. So we'll first build or try to reconstruct the set as is, and then we'll try to use more I don't know, some modifications and see if we can make it look even better. It's a little bit random, all these different pieces. Just gonna put things down. We'll see how far what we'll need. This is a bit of a trial and error type of construction. Santa Claus was based off Gandalf, maybe. All right, Arnold, see you later. What is your plan for the MOC? So I want to expand it a little bit more. See if I can make it a little bit rounder as well. I think the original design was a bit chunky. But then again, it's always hard to judge a set just from the pictures. My experience so far has been that if you build something for real, it often in 3D looks very different from what you thought it would look like. Wow, I think I just have to open up all these bags and let's see. As this is, of course, taking place in the Shire, it's got a lot of grass. Unfortunately for this build, they used the darker green. There is also a lighter green, which is often used in, I think, in the Lego Friends sets, which is targeted towards girls. And somehow I think that lighter green would be more suitable, I think, for the Shire, because I've actually been there. I've been on the set where it was all filmed. And the colors over there are much lighter. It's not this dark green grass like the soccer grass that we have over here, but it looks more, I don't know, a little bit more friendly. But again, we'll just build with what we have right now. And we'll see if we can make it better. That is a 3. This is definitely a lot more relaxed, I have to say, than the Slave 1, which is so technical. Hello, Terence. What is my favorite scene in the books of Tolkien? That's a good question. There are so many things I love. I think the scene that had me choking up is where Frodo is giving up, and then Sam is takes Frodo on his back and carries him all the way up to Mount Doom, and I just love that friendship between the two hobbits and the way that Sam is just heroic in the way it's never about him. He always wants Frodo to succeed, and I think that's such a powerful message, especially now in our world that is so self-centered often, and where people are often more worried about themselves than about others. I really, really like that. Ooh, lots of small pieces here. This is knockoff Lego. So it's brandless basically. And what I'm going to do is I have a lot of real Lego, but I don't have enough green stuff, and I certainly don't have, in order to build the specific, like the doors, you need these pieces. And these are very, very hard to get because there are not many sets that have these, especially not in this brown color. So it's almost impossible to build this with real Lego. Unless you can pay for it, which is way beyond my budget. But I'll try to make up with Lego by using my real Lego in conjunction with the fake stuff, and see how far it'll get us. The thing is, this Chinese stuff, it's not really, it's not the real Hobbit set, so it's kind of a mashup of things, and it's not even advertised as being Baggin. But it uses a lot of the elements, I think, of the Baggin set. It's just different enough, I guess. So I don't know how I actually really don't know if I can make the if I can get any, if I can get close to what the original one looks like, but we'll see. We'll see how far we get. Bonsoir Aurélien, comment ça va? Christian question: how are you sure that everything is true in the Bible and not invented? I'm a Christian, but I'm starting to have doubts. Well, that is a very important question, and it is very logical that you have doubts. It all depends on how you first were educated when it comes to the Bible, what kind of explanation people gave. For instance, there are huge differences between the Catholic way of looking at the Bible and the way the Bible is considered in certain Protestant groups. The first thing you need to know is the Bible is a literary product. So it's written over many centuries in very different styles by different people with different backgrounds and from different cultures. So when we say the Bible is the Word of God, what it doesn't say is that God was just sitting down at his typewriter and gave us this text, and every single word is exactly how God would say it. It is, when we say it's God's word, it is what God wants to communicate to us, but using human writers and using stories from all sorts of eras and in different styles to convey a truth that is deeper than the literal meaning of it. So, and I'm talking from a Catholic perspective. What Catholics could never subscribe to, and has actually never really been part of the Christian tradition until the kind of the evangelical movement, is that every single thing that you read in the Bible is a description of the way things were. Like if you would read the story of Adam and Eve, as if that's an eyewitness account of how that transpired. It is not, and it would be a very erroneous way of looking at the story. It wouldn't do justice to what the writer wants to express in that story. It is not a eyewitness account. It is actually a literary genre, and it's not the only creation story. Actually, a lot of people don't realize that there are two versions of the creation story in the book of Genesis, pointing to probably two different sources. Of course, at first, the Bible, as we know it, is based on oral traditions. These were stories that were told from generation to generation. And every time the story gets transmitted, people add their own interpretation and their own layers to the story. Now, that does not invalidate the truth. It's just that when you take everything like that, I know people, friends of mine, that say, well, it's written in the Bible that the earth was created in 7 days. And there are no dinosaurs in the Bible. And that there is a certain age that is mentioned of how old the earth is. And so that has to be factual truth. So everything that science teaches us, it must be false. Because the Bible says differently. Well, Catholics will never venture into that territory. Because the story of Genesis was not written as let's say, a scientific description of how the earth was made. It wants to convey a very important truth, and that is that our creation in which we live is not random. It's not a coincidence. It is willed. It is animated by God's will and by God's life-giving breath, by the Holy Spirit. And when you look at the story of Adam and Eve, we depict it, we think, oh, it's because they ate an apple. Well, that, of course, is not what the story tells us. The story wants to express in a literary form, in a story, a fundamental truth, and that is that the fact that we live in this broken world and that we ourselves are so broken, and sin was never part of God's original plan, but was the result of a free choice by those that preceded us, Adam and Eve. Like God did not, create us in this broken form. It's something that we caused ourselves, and so in that way, if you look at for instance, the historical descriptions, there are lots of wars that are described. But if you go and look at the facts from a historical perspective, and scientists have been doing that, or historians have been doing that, you will find many flaws in those stories. Very often, the accounts that you find in the Bible are mixed up, and they use different stories from different time periods. They even mix generations, like they will talk about this king and then that king, and they were fighting, and well, they never lived in the same, not even in the same century. So what happens is that these are part of a narrative that grows over time, and people try to interpret the things that happen to them, the historical things that happen to them, in the perspective of what is God's plan in all this. And in order to convey the truth of God's plan, they will compress the stories. They will adapt them. They will make them better in a certain way. They will add layers. And a lot of, if you look at this from a literal and a simplistic perspective, you could think, well then of course the Bible is just a storybook. It's just it's a fairy tale. But that is not the case. There is definitely, and that is also scientifically proven, there are many historical underpinnings of the stories that you read in the Bible. But they're not meant as an historical account because it is a story. And a story wants to tell, has a message. And it's just like, what helps me to understand this is music. You know, if you have music, what is music? Music is notes, it's tones, it's melodies. And how do you transmit music? By writing it down, by using a certain, written form of you put the notes and how long they should take, so that you can replicate it. The thing is, if you just play the notes, if you've ever used a MIDI file, for instance, on your computer, and you let the computer play it, it doesn't sound like music. It sounds terrible. Why? Because it's just the notes and the computer playing exactly that. What makes music music? It's, for instance, it's the individual artist. It's the orchestra with all these many talent. I mean, there's a huge difference between, let's say, the Imperial March played by a brass band made out of amateurs or a full-fledged professional orchestra. Could be exactly the same notes, but it sounds completely different because these musicians add their interpretation, their musicality to it. You have a director who directs the music, and sometimes will slow down this part and enhance this or make this louder or that, and he adds layers of interpretation to the music that were not there on paper and may not even have been there in the original composition by, let's say, a Mozart or in this case John Williams. Does that make the music invalid? Does it make it wrong? No, it's just it adds layers, and the more layers you add, the more beautiful the music will become. And actually, we know for a fact that a lot of the performances of symphonies, for instance, nowadays with our professional musicians and our musical tradition and the quality of the instruments actually sounds better than that music will have sounded in the time of Mozart or whatever. So again, it's the same process. Does it mean that it's not faithful to the original? No, it's just it adds layers of interpretation, and that is how Catholics look at the Bible. It is you don't fall in the pitfall of considering it to be a literal or a scientific account. It is not and never wanted to be one. So it leaves science, it leaves room for scientific. There's no opposition, in my view, between the concept of evolution, for instance, and the story of Genesis. Because what the story of Genesis wants to tell us is that humans are not there by accident. They are willed by God. The free will that we have is a gift. And it's up to us how we use it. That's why God enlists the help of Adam and Eve in the story to name creation. He gives them a role. He gives them an autonomy. And that autonomy has a huge danger, a huge risk. And that is that people can use that autonomy to turn away from God. And thereby, of course, causing death and destruction. And if you look at biblical stories, and then there are different, because of different genres, you have also different degrees of historicity. I think that's how you say it. So, for instance, the New Testament stories, the accounts of the things that Jesus did, are, in some cases, thousands of years newer than the oldest stories in the Bible. And also, the things mentioned in the Gospels are verifiable by outside sources as well. So there are historians in the Roman times that have written about Jesus. And so that makes it much more verifiable, but also in the Gospels. There are 4 Gospels, and not one single Gospel is exactly the same. They will tell different versions of the same event because they're written by different people. They were written for a different audience. And that is why it's so important to, when you want to understand what the Bible is, that you study literature in general, that you read Tolkien, for instance. Tolkien is the same thing. Bilbo Baggins writes his adventures in Middle-earth from his perspective. And so he sometimes twists the way he tells the story, and it's different from what actually happened because he wants to embellish it, give himself a better role. Maybe he has given it a lot of thought, and so even the story within the story, the Red Book is has that interpretative layer, and Tolkien was very much aware of how that works because he studied literature, so he was very well aware of how mythology works and how stories turn into myth. That's a beautiful introduction to The Lord of the Rings, where history turns to story, stories turn to legend, legends turn to myth. It's a description of how stories work in our culture, in our history. That was a very long-winded explanation or answer to your question. So, in the Catholic perspective, there is no opposition between science and the Bible because they both are talking about different aspects of reality. Just like faith and science can never be in opposition, they both seek the truth, but science will think and reflect on the how and the why. How were planets formed, and why are we circling around the sun instead of the universe circling around the earth, etc. What faith is talking about and what science can never really tell us is where to. What is the purpose? What is the meaning? And so the meaning is something on a metaphysical level. So it's not a description of the physicality of the world, but the metaphysical aspect of reality. Why is what is? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? Is it, science can only describe. Same thing with love. You can give a very scientific description of love, and you explain it by hormonal processes, by cultural, behavioral sciences. They can all shed light on the processes of how people get together and fall in love, etc. But if you've ever fallen in love, you know that that is not everything. And it will not explain away this mystery of what love is. And that love can even go so far as go beyond the physical attraction or the hormones and all that. So, yeah. I'm already missing something here. Something I can't replicate. There's something strange here. Anyway, we'll figure it out. All right, let me go back to the chat room because I've been talking for way too long. Proud Hufflepuff is going to Galaxy's Edge. Oh. You are so lucky. The quality of the fake Lego is usually not very good. It's hard plastic. You can't do much wrong, but it always feels a little bit more. You have to apply more pressure, and it doesn't look as good as real Lego. Proud Hufflepuff says, I'm also a Christian, but I don't believe the whole Adam and Eve story and Earth being created in 7 days, etc. And you feel it's a sin because you were told I'm drifting away from religion. That is not true. Don't let anyone tell you that. You're just using your brain. And it all comes down to what is the tradition in which you were brought up. And a lot of people are afraid of doubt because they feel, well, you're not, if the Bible is not true, if it wasn't 7 days, then everything falls apart, which is, of course, nonsense. It is as if, our fairy tales because they're fake, they're made up, there are no real dragons, that they're useless. And well, of course not. Fairy tales are moral stories. And the difference with the Bible, of course, is that they're not based on historical facts and historical events. But they definitely have something to tell us, and you can learn from fairy tales even if you don't believe in them, literally. You believe in the values that are transmitted. Why am I such a Star Wars fan? It's not because I think Star Wars is on an equal level as religion, or that the stories of George Lucas are like the Bible. Absolutely not. But there are very important human values and moral values that are transmitted through the story of Star Wars, and they're true in real life as well. Even without lightsabers and without spaceships, a lot of what Star Wars is truly about, and the same is true for The Hobbit and for The Lord of the Rings, it's still true. And there are a lot of lessons that you can learn from those stories. Brenda wants to know, do you have any suggestions for talking about religion with friends or family members who take the Bible literally? Or should these conversations just be avoided at all costs? It depends. The first thing I always want to check is there real openness? Which is often not the case. They want to convince you of their point of view, which is usually doesn't lead to a true conversation. So there needs to be a real curiosity. So you don't believe that the Bible is literal, but yet you consider yourself to be very faithful and you believe in God. How so? If that is a real question and a real curiosity, that's where you can try to start explaining it. But the worst way of having a conversation about faith is, oh, you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you why you're wrong, and I'm right, because then, what happens is Helm's Deep. People will fight, and they will build a fortress. So always wait for the other person to ask it. That's kind of how I approach these conversations in the chat. I'm just building Lego. I'm not here to preach. But if some of you have a question, I'm here to answer it. But I won't shove it down your throat. I'm just kind of witnessing, well, this is how I look at things, and this is how my church looks at things. Take it for what it is, and think about it, and make your own decisions. That is, you never can get poorer from hearing someone else's point of view. It can always help you think, well, where do I stand? So that is why I think conversations are so important to faith. And doubt is so important. Because if you don't doubt, if you never doubt, I don't think you ever started to believe. Believe is to go beyond your doubt and to find the truth is self-evident in a certain way. And it doesn't depend on whether you believe it or not. And so doubt is perfectly legitimate. And if you read the Bible carefully, you will see a lot of great personalities in the Bible doubting. And it's not considered to be something wrong. Jesus is constantly talking and explaining to his disciples who they don't get it. They don't believe it. They don't understand it. But it's written down as something that ultimately helps them. You have to ask questions. It's very much part of the Jewish tradition as well. Never take anything for granted, not even the Bible stories, but ask questions. Why? Why is this story like this? Why is this night different from all other nights? Why? And it's by seeking and by questioning and by doubting that you will start this process of searching the truth. And the truth we are not the ones who will make the truth. The truth is there, and it will find us, or we will stumble upon it. What is required is an open mind, and I think someone who doubts is showing a very open mind. This is how I was brought up, this is what they taught me, but could very well be different, or is it? And so it's much more important to have doubts and to make your own decisions in faith, and to just take everything for granted and, it must be so because, the pastor told me it was so, the Bible says it is so, and so I'm just going to shut down my brain. You didn't get these brains for nothing. You got to use them. So again, science says, yes, this universe took millions of years to form. But the biblical story is not a scientific account, but it gives us the most important question that science cannot answer, and that is, why are we on this planet? Why are we here? And are we alone? And are we just a coincidence and just some cells and some biochemical reactions? Or are we actually loved? Are we created? Do we have a soul? Are we created in the likeness of God? So what does that tell us about ourselves and our place in the world? That is the stuff that Genesis talks about. And all the numbers that you read about in those stories are symbolic numbers. 7 is a symbolic number for a lifetime, for something that is whole, that is finished. Look at the days of the week. It's every week is a new week, and so it kind of makes sense that this is the first week of creation, and but it's only the beginning, and then it's up to us to fill in the weeks that follow after that, etc., etc. So there are many different reasons, and that's where literary studies can really help understand the literary genre. Look at the Psalms, for instance. That's songs. Those are songs. Those are meant to be sung, and those are meant to be performed, and so very different from the story of Genesis or from the historical accounts that you may read. Okay, well, this is complicated because, again, this set is not, it has a lot of the elements from the Baggin set, but it was not meant to be a Baggin set. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out what belongs where. And I'm not even sure it's complete, but we'll figure it out. Part of the fun. There's a lot of fundamental building here. I think this is just a garden, what's supposed to be the garden of Bilbo Baggin's home. And 1 of 6. I guess that's this. And one more. 4. I'm still working on the camera problem, by the way. I'm just using the webcam again, so it's super simple. But I've got my eye on a Dell laptop. It's a tad expensive, that's why I'm kind of a bit queasy about it. But I think the XPS laptops are really good, and especially the ones with the i7 are powerful enough to drive multiple webcams. So that would solve a lot of my problems. I'm not exactly sure what the color is. If it's dark, I think it's dark gray here. These must be the steps in front of the door. So far it all looks super symmetrical, not very hobbity. 1 more of 6. Now you can say you went to church. Stephen Hawking is also a great read. Yes, absolutely. You know what the problem of Stephen Hawking is? He's a great scientist, and I really admire the scope of what he's been able to do. But I think where he goes wrong, and I say this as a philosopher, not as a scientist, is that he kind of goes from science does not prove God to so that proves that there is no God, which is something that a philosopher would never say. He basically says there is no need for God to explain the universe, because it's all physics. And again, it's the same mistake that a lot of scientists make, and not all. There are a lot of Catholic scientists. Actually, there's a very brilliant Catholic astronomer on the payroll of the Vatican, who's very, he could have a good debate, and has had debates with Stephen Hawking. But when you say, well, there's no need for God, I would immediately reply, not to explain how things were made, because science, astronomy, evolution, you can get very far with that, but it still doesn't give me a clue about the answer to the question, what's the point? What's the purpose? What's the meaning? You need faith for that. You need or at least philosophy for that. I'm not necessarily faith, because with philosophy you can also think about purpose and about meaning. Uh-oh. I think I already came across a piece that is missing. I need one more circular plate, and I don't think it's there. Well, oh, there it is. I found it. Good. So you don't believe in dinosaurs or in evolution? I do believe, of course. That's what I said. Dinosaurs, evolution. It's all. It's not. Oh, wait a minute. Am I doing something wrong? Oh, there should be one up. It's just that the Bible doesn't give you a scientific description, but it tells fundamental truths about the purpose of creation and our place in it. And that is something that you can't explain, you can't describe with science. It's metaphysical. And again, this would even be subscribed, this is a position that's held by many atheist philosophers as well. It's like morality. You can't explain away morality by just describing biochemical processes or hormones or whatever. Self-sacrifice is another thing. You can't really explain that away from just a scientific. You have to. That gets to different categories, and it doesn't mean that science is wrong, but it just means that it is only a partial description of. And a partial reflection on our existence. Alex says, the science can't prove God because God is outside of our world. That's true. Like a man who builds a wooden castle, that man is not included in his creation. I believe this is why science can't prove God. It's true. It's true. I mean, God is not created. God is. He is and this is kind of classic metaphysics. You have the beings, that what is, and then you have the being itself, the act of being. And the act of being is what philosophers and theologians have always ascribed to God. So God is not created. He's out. As soon as you make a god, like, I don't know, Thor or any of the other, the gods that you see in some cultures, by definition, it's no longer God, because he's part of the creation. This is indeed a Baggin, Andrew. That's what I'm making. Baggin. Does it need a purpose? Does the earth need a purpose? That's a good question. Maybe not. Maybe not, but I need a purpose. I definitely need a purpose. I want to know what if my life has a meaning, and I think that I think that faith gives me a much more logical, it kind of makes more sense that life has a meaning than that it hasn't. Because there's so much meaning in my life, so much meaning I give to my life. So that's, yeah, I think that mankind has always wondered about meaning and always wants reasons. That's one of the reasons that we have scientists. We cannot just take the world as it is. We want to know why. We want to know where we come from. We want to know where we're going and what we can do, how we can pass it on. There are so many illogical behaviors that all point to our thirst of, there's more to my existence than just pure randomness. All right, Kieran, see you later. Linda says, this is my favorite Lego video so far. I love hearing you talk about your faith, Father. You even scratched the surface of some of the doubt I feel myself. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's kind of what we do. We do Lego and we do philosophy. And for me, it's also it's a good exercise to. Of course, I majored in philosophy and in theology, so I did a total of 10 years of university studies. But none of that is useful if you can't translate it, if you can't, if it doesn't help you to explain, I'm not explaining myself, but you need to be able to transmit it in a certain way. So it's a good exercise. And your questions also help me. It sharpens the mind and it makes me aware of, well, maybe I'm thinking too easily about things. The beginning of wisdom is always asking questions, or people that ask you questions, and then you have to think about, so why do I actually believe what I believe, and why do I do what I do? And for some denominations, for some Christians, that is perceived to be a huge threat. If you doubt, if you start listening to divergent opinions, if you watch movies that are not Christian, gosh, I've had so many of these discussions of people burning me on the internet because I like Star Wars and I talk about Star Wars. And I was like, oh, you're a priest, you're supposed to be talking about priestly things. And then I'm like, yeah, well, I also am a human being. I need to eat. I cannot live from holy water alone. So, and the same thing is true about our culture. There's so much more to our culture than just the religious dimension of it. And one doesn't preclude the other. But for some people, it makes them afraid that everything starts to crumble. And when you start to feel that, then I wonder what your faith is based on. If it can't stand up to critical discussion, that is. I think it should. And I think you actually should seek that discussion and seek to be challenged. Because if it's true, then truth will be able to withstand that kind of criticism. But then again, if you take everything literally, and then a scientist tells you, well, you know what, dinosaurs, your story about the 7 days, that can't be true because, well, science. Then you get stuck with that and so the only way out, or there are actually two options if you take everything literally in faith. And again, I'm not talking about it being a fairy tale, but truth is so much more than just literal truth. So the only way out, if you take everything literally, like you see in a lot of evangelical circles, is either I stop believing, which happens a lot, unfortunately. A lot of people are like, well, it's everything that I've been told is a fairy tale. It's all fake, just like Santa Claus. It was all just make-believe, and it's just soothing stories for children. Who can believe in that? And I can be a good human being without faith. That is kind of usually what follows afterwards. But that's a false dichotomy. Or the other way out is I take everything literally. I close myself for anyone who challenges me. This is my faith. This is what God says. It's all true, and science is wrong. That doesn't really satisfy either. That doesn't hold up anyway. So it's always, you have to go beyond that. Ask yourself, well, why? What is this? How is this helping me how can these stories? What is the true message of these stories? What is the real truth underneath those stories that have been told from generation to generation? And what is the real truth that is expressed in them? And how can that truth help me to get closer to love, to God? The moment you start to feel like, oh, everything is crumbling and it's falling apart, instead of panicking, you should be thankful. You should, well, wait, perhaps my foundation wasn't as solid as I thought, so I have to dig deeper. But I totally recognize the kind of the existential, I'd say that, anguish that you can sometimes feel when you're evolving. It's like a snake shedding its skin to grow bigger. The process of shedding your skin is hard, it's difficult, it makes you uncomfortable. And in faith, it's in many ways, it's like that. You're evolving, you're trying to, when we were children, we believed at a certain level. Just like, again, let's bring this back to The Hobbit. When Tolkien first told The Hobbit as a story, it was a bedtime story for his children. He had no idea how this story would evolve over time. So that's why there are many, many versions of The Hobbit. And the first version is almost unrecognizable. It's so different from the story that we currently read. But the more his children started to grow, the more Tolkien himself was growing and the story in his head was evolving, the more depth that story got and the more he added layers to the original Hobbit story to connect it to the Lord of the Rings, to make it deeper, more meaningful. Does it mean that Tolkien betrayed his own story? No. He just added layers so that the story got better and told even deeper truths than the original fairy tale story. So there are a lot of things we can learn from Tolkien's storytelling. Okay, I see a lot of blocks here that don't belong in Middle Earth. Okay. You got one more here. This is the wisest YouTube stream. I'm not sure about that. So, is it terrible if there is not a heaven, but only your energy flows back in the universe? To a certain extent, yes. I mean, it doesn't really matter to the universe, but it would matter to me because, oops, I see a mosquito. Okay. It would make my life so pointless. Whereas every fiber in me wants to feel that my life matters. And that is why I think so many world leaders, for instance, have built, all these big cathedrals and statues and fountains. It's this, they want to matter after they're dead. But a fountain or a statue is still going to crumble a couple of centuries from now. So it doesn't satisfy that necessity of wanting our lives to matter. And ultimately, the only thing that makes our lives truly worth living is love. And without love, you have nothing. And so there is the ultimate thing, I think, the ultimate, let's say, the foundation of the Bible and of faith is this conviction, or this thing that is transmitted from one generation to another, is that we matter, our lives matter because we are loved. And not just by human beings that perish and are forgotten afterwards, but there is God who will to whom we matter to an infinite degree. And also the people that don't matter to anyone. I always think of the people that were not as lucky as we are, and have lived very short lives and very lives of suffering. Faith helps me to understand that their lives were not in vain, because they were all part of, there's still a God that remembers them and values them, and will one day console them and feed them and cherish them and love them. And without that faith, so much, especially suffering, would become so intolerable. It still is intolerable, even when you are believing, because we're not made for that. But yeah, I would say it's easy to say that it doesn't matter if you live a very comfortable life and everything is fine, but what about all those people that live terrible lives and no one loves them and they never experience that? I want justice for those people. So by that alone, I want God to exist, because, man, the world is a horrible place without that faith. And it would make me, at least, again, I'm speaking for myself, it would make me so lazy, because if there is no hope after this life, what does it matter? I may just enjoy life and do whatever I please and not care and not help, because, those people are lost anyway. They're going to die and they'll be forgotten. But if I believe that there is a God who loves every single human being, even if they are small or broken, then I need to love those people too. I need to be like God and try to help and try to love as much as I can. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is almost time to wrap things up. I have made quite a bit of progress here. I'm starting to see where this is going. So this is going to be, I think, the garden. This looks like the entrance to the big round door, and I already saw some of those brown elements that will probably be somehow stuck to this. I'm not sure how that works, but as you can tell from the enormous amount of pieces here, there's still a lot to do, so no worries, we'll continue this tomorrow. And I see that the mosquito is on the lamp in front of me, but if I hit it, I'm going to knock the lamp over, so I'm not going to do that. Oh boy, oh boy. Linda wants to know, how can I have a real conversation about religion with people who dismiss it as fairy tales? How can I employ empathy and align my story with theirs? If someone disses your faith as just being a fairy tale, that's not very respectful. So I'm not sure if I would want to have a discussion about faith with people that are not open to how I experience it or how I look at that. So respect goes both ways. So I'd first ask for that. If there's real interest, then you can have a conversation. If there's just like, you're wrong, you believe in fairy tales, I'd rather believe in Star Wars because at least it has lightsabers. That's why it's so dangerous to go after mosquitoes. Okay, I almost knocked everything over. But I would always don't start with your own point of view. Start with theirs. Ask questions. So what do you believe? What makes your life worthwhile? What stories inspire you? Let them explain. And then always look for the values that you have in common. And so love. Why do you think that certain actions are immoral? And why? So why do you do what you do? Why do you try to be a good person? And what helps you in that? And where does it come from? Always ask one question beyond that. So what is this? What's the inspiration? That's what I would do. Just ask questions. Let the other person wonder. If you do that, you already help them, because faith starts with curiosity. It starts with wondering, why am I here? What is the purpose? And then you have to, at least I personally always believe that it's not me who is going to convince anyone. And I don't even want to try. But what I want is that other person is making his or her own journey. And then, if God exists, let's put it in a hypothetical. I don't even want to suppose that everyone agrees with me that God exists. But let's say the hypothesis. In case God does exist, and He is able to lead us, then I have to trust that He will lead those people that are genuinely searching for the truth, that He will guide them. And so maybe the best service that I can do to other people is help them ask the right questions and wonder, why am I here? Why is there love? Why is the universe? Why is there so much sense if everything is just a coincidence? Stuff like that. So ask questions and truly try to understand. So empathy always starts with the other person. Try to understand why the other person lives the way he or she does, and try to value what is valuable, because it's, whoa, no, gotcha. I crushed it with Legos. It did not survive the Lego onslaught. There it is. I cannot focus on it, but it was crushed by Legos before it could bite me, because I've had a lot of mosquito bites while I was building the slave one last week. Anyway, so hopefully this mosquito will be in heaven now. You need to make you have to make the most of this life, because you don't know if there's an afterlife. That could be a motivation. You don't know. Well, and that's why this life also matters. I totally agree with that. But it would be even better if I make the most out of this life and then there is a sequel to it. Anywho, I will talk to you guys later. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and I love doing Middle-earth Lego. It is a lot of fun. Talk to you guys later. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll probably be back tomorrow. Ciao.